The wind kicked up dust across the auction yard, stinging eyes and cloaking the rusted gates in a shifting haze of beige. A chorus of whinnies and hooves echoed through the open-air pen, but no sound cut sharper than the thin, cracked cry of a newborn Mustang, Foal lying flat against the dirt. Its coat was patchy and matted, its legs curled beneath its frail body, like broken twigs. The mare it had clung to moments before had just been loaded into a trailer. She'd fought the halter, eyes wild, until the door slammed shut and silence followed. Now the foal was alone, orphaned, and unnoticed, except by one man standing by the back rail. Luke Barrett didn't know what had drawn him to the auction that morning. He hated these places, always had. He told himself he was just passing through town for feed, just needed a few bales and maybe a new stirrup strap. But something about the noise had pulled him from his truck. He stood motionless now, arms crossed, leaning on the fence, the brim of his hat low over his face. The foal let out another weak cry. It wasn't just noise, it was pleading, desperate. It reminded him of something he hadn't heard in years. A group of buyers nearby was chuckling over a mare they'd just scored for cheap. One of them glanced at the foal and snorted. "That one won't make it to sundown." Luke's eyes narrowed. The foal struggled, lifting its head an inch, only to collapse back into the dirt. Its tiny chest rose and fell with shallow effort. A trail of mucus clung to its nose. The auctioneer gave a half-hearted wave. "This one here, mangy orphan. No mother. No guarantee of survival. Let's start at 5. Silence. A fly buzzed around the foal's face. It didn't flinch. 3, 2. Still silence. $1. Laughter from the crowd. Someone muttered, "Might as well leave it for the coyotes." Luke's boots shifted against the gravel. He felt something stir in his chest, something rusted shut long ago. He hadn't heard that sound since the day his wife died, soft, helpless crying that no one wanted to answer. He raised his hand. $1. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. Sold. There was no applause, no comment. People went back to their business. A few gave Luke odd glances. He didn't care. He moved slowly, deliberately, past the pens and trailers until he reached the gate where the foal lay. A teenager opened it for him. "You sure, mister? It's not gonna make it." Luke didn't answer. He knelt beside the foal and looked it over. It was all bones and fear. When he reached out, the foal twitched, but didn't move away. Its eyes were wide and dull. He sighed. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know how that feels." He wrapped the foal gently in his jacket and lifted it, careful not to jostle its fragile limbs. It didn't resist. It just lay there, breathing weakly, pressing its nose once against his chest. Luke swallowed hard. The drive home took 40 minutes. The foal rested in the bed of the truck, wrapped in a horse blanket Luke had kept from better years. He checked the rearview mirror often, watching for movement, for signs of life. A few times, he thought it had stopped breathing, but then its chest would rise again barely. Luke's ranch sat quiet and forgotten at the edge of dry ridge. The fences leaned. The barn roof sagged. The house was more shadow than home. He backed the truck up to the barn and carried the foal inside, laying it gently in a thick pile of old hay. He lit the overhead bulb, a dim yellow flicker, and stood over the animal for a long moment. "You're a fool, Barrett," he muttered to himself. "You couldn't save her. What makes you think you can save this one?" He went to work anyway. Water, heat, a bottle fashioned from a soda bottle, and a rubber glove. He warmed formula on the stovetop and whispered the same quiet phrases his wife had once said to frightened horses. Asterisk, "It's okay. You're not alone. You're safe." Asterisk. For the first 2 days, the foal refused everything. It wouldn't drink, wouldn't lift its head. Luke stayed in the barn most nights, dozing against the wall. He didn't talk to neighbors, didn't answer his phone. It was just him and the foal, breathing together in the dark. On the 3rd morning, as dawn crept through the barn slats, the foal lifted its head and nuzzled the bottle, lips fumbling at the rubber glove. Luke froze, afraid to move. It drank. Just a few drops. But it drank. Luke exhaled slowly, his chest tight. He reached out and stroked the foal's head gently. Its eyes blinked, still cloudy, still unsure, but present. He sat beside it for a while in silence. "Dusty," he said finally. "You look like you were born from a dust storm. Let's see if we can make something out of that." By nightfall, Dusty could lift his head for longer. Luke began massaging his legs with warm towels, working to stimulate blood flow. Every few hours, he tried feeding again. Slowly, the foal responded. In those early days, Luke didn't realize how often he was talking again. Real talking, not muttering or yelling at the wind. He told Dusty about the land, about Clara, his late wife, about how they used to rescue wild horses together. He told him how he'd let it all go after she passed, how the barn had fallen quiet and the gates rusted shut. "You're the first thing that's looked me in the eye in 5 years," he said softly one night, voice barely above a whisper. "And you don't even know what you're looking at." Dusty let out a soft grunt, then curled his legs beneath him and drifted off. Luke stared at the foal for a long time. His old bones ached. His hands were raw from labor he hadn't done in years. But there was something alive now in the stillness. Fragile, yes, but real. He stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked around the barn, eyes landing on the row of empty stalls. Once, every one of them had been filled. He reached for a broom and started to clean. Outside, the wind picked up again, swirling dust across the fields. But inside the barn, for the first time in years, there was warmth, there was breath, and the faint sound of something new beginning. Dusty grew stronger with each passing day, though his legs still trembled under the weight of his own body. Luke watched him closely from the barn bench, his coffee untouched in his hands. The foal, once limp and near lifeless, now wobbled on his feet, eyes brighter, ears twitching at every new sound. Luke didn't smile often, not anymore, but something about watching the colt struggle to balance, then succeed, brought a flicker of warmth behind his grizzled expression. He'd fashioned a sling from old harnesses and canvas, hanging it from the rafters with makeshift knots. Every morning, he eased Dusty into the contraption, guiding the little Mustang's legs into place. At first, Dusty protested with weak kicks and sharp snorts, but Luke never flinched. He murmured in a low, steady tone, sometimes saying nothing at all. He had learned that presence, solid and still, meant more than words. As the sling swayed, Dusty's hooves brushed the dirt floor, his legs learning again what it meant to move. Each inch of progress felt monumental. Luke charted it not on paper, but in glances, in the quiet pride that bloomed when Dusty took a step without stumbling. One afternoon, as golden sunlight spilled across the hay-strewn floor, Dusty stood unaided for the first time. It wasn't graceful. His legs splayed like a newborn deer, and he wobbled as though the earth tilted beneath him. But he stood. Luke watched without saying a word, his eyes misted and distant. "You stubborn little cuss," he whispered at last. "Just like her." He turned away then, as if saying her name aloud might shatter something. Later that evening, Luke found himself standing by a faded photograph on the mantel. Clara stood in the frame, one hand on the neck of a paint mare, her smile effortless. Luke traced the edge of the frame with a calloused finger. "You'd like him," he murmured. "He's got that fire." Dusty was more than a foal now. He was a presence. He followed Luke around the paddock, bumping his nose into the old man's leg when he wanted attention. Luke found himself talking again, about Clara, about the wild horses they'd once rescued, about the land and how it was changing. Dusty never interrupted, never judged. He just listened with wide, intelligent eyes. Despite the progress, not everything came easy. Dusty's right leg still bent awkwardly, and some days it refused to bear weight at all. Luke massaged it gently each night, with warm rags soaked in liniment, whispering encouragement like prayer. The world beyond the ranch kept moving indifferent. Luke hadn't spoken to anyone in town since the auction. The phone rang once. He let it go to voicemail. A neighbor left a note tucked into the mailbox. Asterisk, "You okay out there? Need help fixing that fence." Asterisk, Luke burned it in the wood stove. He didn't want help. He wanted quiet and Dusty. But quiet didn't mean peace. One night, after a long day of work, Luke dreamed of Clara. In the dream, she stood at the barn door, her hands open. She looked sad. "You have to let go," she said gently. "I can't," Luke replied. She looked past him. then hold on to something worth keeping. He woke in a sweat, the barn still and dark except for the soft shifting of Dusty in the straw. The dream unsettled him. The weight of it hung over the next morning like fog. That day, Dusty refused the bottle. He kicked when Luke tried to adjust his sling, whinnying sharply. Luke's patience wore thin. "Fine," he snapped, tossing the sling to the corner. "If you want to lie there and rot, be my guest." He stormed out of the barn. Dusty let out a shrill cry behind him, one that pierced straight through the shield Luke had built around his heart. He stopped halfway to the house, hands clenched at his sides. The wind rattled the dry branches of the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The ranch felt too big, too empty. Luke turned back. Dusty was trying to stand again, without the sling, without help. His limbs shook violently, but he pressed on, gritting against pain with every small movement. Luke watched, his anger melting into awe. He stepped forward, kneeling beside him. All right, he said softly. "Let's do it your way." Together, they worked in silence. Luke didn't try the sling again. He let Dusty choose his pace. And though progress was slower, it was real, earned. That night, Luke sat outside the barn, staring at the horizon. Stars began to peek through the dusky sky. He didn't notice the tears until one fell onto his wrist. "I lost her," he said aloud. "But maybe I don't have to lose myself too." The next day, he called the vet. Dr. Marla Sutton arrived in a dusty SUV, stepping out in worn jeans and a denim jacket patched at the elbows. She hadn't seen Luke in years. Her expression was wary but kind. "I heard you adopted a ghost," she said. "He's not a ghost anymore," Luke replied. She examined Dusty carefully, checking joints, taking notes, brushing the Foal's coat. Dusty tolerated her touch, but stayed close to Luke's side. "He's healing," she finally said. "Still a limp, but he's got a chance." Luke nodded. "You did good," Marla added, glancing at him. "I didn't do anything special." "You answered a cry nobody else heard." He didn't reply. Before she left, she paused at the truck. "You ever think about fixing up this place again? Clara would have wanted that." Luke didn't respond, but that night he stood for a long time in front of the unused tool shed, imagining it full again. Imagining life here, not just survival. Dusty whinnied from the barn. Luke turned. He saw not a broken foal, but a beginning. And for the first time in years, he whispered back, "I hear you." Luke woke to the sound of metal groaning in the wind. The old barn door creaked open, just wide enough to let in a sliver of sunlight and the smell of summer dust. Dusty was already standing, his head high, ears twitching toward the breeze like he was waiting for something. He'd grown, not just in size, but in spirit. The limp was still there, but less pronounced. His coat had begun to shine, sleek and rich beneath the brushing Luke never forgot anymore. The foal who had once lain limp and near lifeless now trotted with cautious pride across the yard, testing the boundaries of what his body could carry. Luke watched him from the porch, sipping his coffee, the creak of the rocking chair the only sound between them. The ranch had changed, subtly. Fences had been mended, the tool shed unlocked. Even the house had a new coat of paint along the southern wall. But there was a tension beneath the quiet, a feeling that peace, like Dusty's newfound strength, was delicate. One phone call could change everything. It came in the form of a knock. Bill Henley, a neighboring rancher with sharp eyes and a mouth that always held more opinion than patience, stood at the gate. He wore his usual faded hat and a coat of suspicion. "You got company coming," he said without a greeting. "County inspectors doing rounds. Health and safety checks. Word is, they're starting with properties that took in unsanctioned rescues." Luke squinted into the sun, unmoved. "This your way of warning me or gloating?" Bill shrugged. "Just thought you'd want to know. Colt like that. He limps too much. They'll mark him unfit. They don't care how much heart he's got." Luke's grip tightened around the railing. "Then they're looking at the wrong things." Bill didn't argue. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but not before adding, "Might want to get your paperwork in order. They ain't patient types." The moment he was gone, Luke's pulse quickened. Paperwork, registration, medical evaluations. Dusty had none of it. The colt was a stray by law, An unregistered Mustang with no verified birth record, no brand, no documented lineage. He'd been bought for $1 in a moment of defiance, not planning. And now that impulse might cost him everything. Dusty trotted over, nosing Luke's arm like he sensed a shift in energy. Luke stared at him, seeing more than just a foal. He saw Clara's spirit, his own salvation, the hours of healing built into every scar on that colt's body. The idea that some clipboard-wielding official might walk in and deem Dusty unworthy lit something hot in his chest. That evening, Luke drove into town, the first time in weeks. He parked outside the veterinary clinic, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and hay. Behind the desk sat Dr. Marla, the same quiet calm in her eyes. "I need proof he's improving," Luke said without sitting down. "He's better now. Eating, walking. Still limps, but he's strong. They're coming to inspect him." Marla nodded, already pulling a chart from a file cabinet. "You knew this might happen. Didn't think it would come this fast. Rescues never have it easy. But that colt, he's worth fighting for." She spent the next hour gathering records from her visits, photos, handwritten notes, even a short video clip she'd taken during her last checkup. Luke watched her move with efficiency, like Clara used to when she believed a horse still had a chance. "You really think they'll listen?" he asked. "They don't always," she admitted. "But it's a start. Paper in their hands gives them less reason to say no." Back home, Luke spent the night repairing the barn door, fixing the broken latch so the wind wouldn't make it groan again. Every board he hammered down, every hinge he oiled, was a quiet defiance. Dusty slept nearby, the occasional twitch in his legs betraying some dream of running. Maybe someday, Luke thought, he will. The next morning brought a dry heat and a white government truck kicking dust down the road. 2 inspectors stepped out, one older, stiff in posture, the other younger and brisk. They looked around with quiet judgment, clipboards at the ready. Luke stood straight as they approached, his boots planted firm in the gravel. "You're Luke Barrett?" the older man asked. "That's right. We're here about an unregistered Mustang in your care." "He's in the barn." They moved quickly, asking curt questions about feed schedules, veterinary records, physical mobility. Marla had coached him. He answered clearly, handing over the binder sheet assembled. The younger inspector flipped through the pages, nodding slowly, expression unreadable. When they finally came to Dusty, he was standing in the open paddock, the sun catching his mane like fire. His ears twitched at the newcomers, uncertain, but he didn't retreat. Luke stayed a step behind him, hands at his sides, silent. "He's got a limp," the older inspector noted, watching Dusty circle warily. "Could be congenital. Could be injury. He was near dead when I got him," Luke said. "He's alive now." "That's not always enough." Something cold settled into Luke's spine. "What do you mean?" The man paused. "We need to see movement. Range of motion. Without support." Luke's heart sank. Dusty had never walked far unassisted. But there was no sling now. No soft transition. Just a wide yard and 3 sets of eyes waiting. Luke knelt, touching Dusty's neck. "You can do this," he said quietly. "Just walk." The colt hesitated, weight shifting from one leg to the other. Luke stepped back, giving him space. Dusty flicked his ears. The sun was hot, the air too still. And then he moved. One slow step, then another. His limp was obvious, but he didn't fall. His head stayed high, his legs awkward but driven. He walked a full circle before stopping in front of Luke again, panting lightly. The inspectors scribbled notes. The younger one gave a small nod. The older closed his folder. "We'll be in touch," he said flatly. "But for now he stays." They left without further word. As the dust from their truck faded into the horizon, Luke stood frozen. Then Dusty leaned into him gently, head against his shoulder. Luke exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. He didn't say a word. He just looked up at the sky, then down at the colt beside him. And for the first time in years, he smiled. The wind carried the scent of fresh hay, and sun-warmed wood across the ranch as summer deepened. Dusty galloped through the pasture with uneven rhythm, stronger now, faster too, though his limp remained a permanent part of his gait. He no longer seemed to mind. Where once he staggered, now he sprinted with resolve, kicking up trails of dust behind him like banners of resilience. Luke leaned against the fence post, arms folded, watching the colt with quiet pride. Every step Dusty took echoed a long journey neither of them could have made alone. The inspection had passed. Barely. The official letter arrived 2 weeks after the visit, folded crisply inside a standard white envelope. No warmth in the wording, just bureaucratic formality granting Dusty permission to stay under conditional status, subject to future checks. But Luke didn't need warmth. He needed time, and the letter gave him that. The ranch had changed even more since then. The barn had been cleaned from roof to floor. Tools were lined up on the walls again, not scattered or rusting. Luke had replaced the broken latch on the front gate, repainted the porch, and cleared the overgrown weeds from the fence line. He hadn't done it all at once, and not for the sake of appearances. He did it because it felt right, because life had returned to the place, and it deserved care. Word of Dusty spread slowly through the town. A few curious passers-by came to see the auction colt who should have died. Luke didn't entertain visitors much, but he didn't turn them away either. He let them stand by the paddock and watch as Dusty trotted to the fence, always curious, always watching with those intelligent eyes that once looked so hollow. Most people didn't say much. They just looked at the colt, then at Luke, and left quieter than they'd arrived. Dr. Marla visited often now, not just to check Dusty, but sometimes just to sit on the porch and drink coffee in silence. Their conversations were sparse, but meaningful. "You ever think you'd be back in this life?" she asked one evening, as they watched the sun bleed orange across the fields. "No," Luke answered honestly, "but he pulled me back in." "He saved you too, huh?" Luke nodded. "I think we saved each other." The past still crept in sometimes. Nights when Luke would wake from dreams of Clara's laughter, only to find the barn silent, the stars unmoved. He'd walk outside, find Dusty lying under the oak near the pasture, and just sit beside him, listening to the night. It was never about forgetting her. It was about finally remembering without breaking. Dusty had grown into a handsome young Mustang. The patchy fur was gone, replaced with a chestnut coat that shimmered in the light. He bore the limp like a scar of honor, never letting it hold him back. Luke began walking him farther each day, gently guiding him with halter and rope down the old trails Clara once rode. One afternoon, a group of children from the local elementary school visited the ranch. Their teacher had heard about Dusty and called to ask if she could bring them by for a small field trip. Luke hesitated at first, but agreed. The kids arrived in a battered yellow bus, their faces pressed to the windows as they saw the horses grazing. Dusty stood apart from the others, curious but cautious. Luke stood before the group, boots in the dirt, voice steady but rough as he spoke. "This one," he said, nodding to Dusty, "was left for dead. Bought him for $1. Thought he wouldn't last the night." A boy raised his hand. "How did he live?" Luke looked at the colt. "He wanted to. I just gave him a place to do it." Dusty slowly approached the fence. One of the younger girls, no older than 7, reached out her hand. Dusty sniffed it, then nuzzled her fingers gently. She smiled so wide Luke felt something loosen in his chest. After the children left, he stood alone in the field, watching the horizon. The ranch was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. That night, he opened the old chest in Clara's room. It hadn't been touched in years. Inside were journals, photographs, hand-sewn blankets, and a letter with his name on it. He hadn't seen it before. His hands trembled as he opened it. "Luke, asterisk if you ever find your way back to the barn, I hope it's because something needed saving, and I hope you let yourself be saved too. The world doesn't run out of broken things, but it never runs out of beauty either. Love it again. Let yourself love again, asterisk. Clara." He didn't cry. He just sat there a long while, the letter resting on his knee, and breathed in the faint scent of lavender from her old shawl. The next morning, Luke painted a new sign over the barn doors. Clara's Hope. He didn't open the place to the public right away. He didn't turn it into a foundation or a nonprofit, but he did begin taking in others, injured horses from auction yards, neglected animals no one wanted. Dusty was the first, and he remained the heart of it all. One morning, just before dawn, Luke led Dusty out to the highest ridge of the pasture. The sky was pink and violet, the air still and cool. Dusty looked out over the hills, ears forward, tail swishing. He looked like he belonged to the land itself. "You came from nothing," Luke said quietly, "but you changed everything." Dusty turned, bumping Luke's shoulder with his head. Luke reached up and scratched behind his ear. "You ready to teach the next one?" As if in answer, a soft whinny came from behind. A skinny gray colt had wandered up to the fence, watching curiously. Dusty trotted over and stood beside him. Luke smiled. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The wind rustled through the trees. The sky brightened. And somewhere in the silence, Clara's voice seemed to echo, not in grief, but in peace. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.